Okay, Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin is a little boy, and Hobbes is his pet tiger, who is completely imaginary. Okay, Calvin and Hobbes are going down a hill in a wagon, and as they go, they move faster and faster, and Calvin makes a little speech. Calvin says, "It's true, Hobbes, ignorance is bliss. Once you know things, you start seeing problems everywhere. And once you see problems, you feel like you ought to try to fix them, and fixing problems always seems to require personal change. And change means doing things that aren't fun, and I say pooey on that. But if you're willfully stupid and you don't know any better, you can keep doing whatever you like. The secret to happiness is short-term stupid self-interest. I think you have to get that tattooed on your body somewhere if you want to be a politician." Hobbes says, "We're headed for that cliff." And Calvin puts his hands over his eyes and says, "I don't want to know about it." And they go over the cliff and they do terrible damage to themselves, and they're lying at the bottom. And Hobbes says, "I don't think I can stand so much bliss." And Calvin says, "Careful, we wouldn't want to learn anything from this." And we didn't. I mean, we're still going over that cliff and doing terrible damage to ourselves.
¿Escucharon a esa señorona? Respeto. Hola a todos, todas, todes. Yo soy Siham y sientan la bienvenida a este videopodcast sobre una de las eminencias en el campo de la ciencia ficción, Octavia Butler.
The visionary black science fiction writer Octavia Butler.
Octavia Butler is one of the most respected science fiction writers working today.
We're talking to Octavia Butler.
Pero Siham, ¿quién es Octavia Butler? Les estoy hablando de una de las escritoras afroamericanas más importantes de la literatura reciente. Ella nació en Pasadena, California, en 1947 y murió en febrero de 2006, de lo que se cree que pudo haber sido un derrame cerebral. Durante su vida fue galardonada varias veces, con el premio Hugo y el premio Nebula, que se le otorgan anualmente a las mejores obras de ciencia ficción o fantasía en Estados Unidos. De hecho, Butler a menudo era llamada la gran dama de la ciencia ficción, y fue la primera autora de este género en recibir la prestigiosa beca MacArthur.
What did the MacArthur Genius Grant mean? Other than money.
First off, they don't call it that. And if it really was that, they probably wouldn't have given it to me, but...
What do they call it?
MacArthur Fellowship.
Fellowship.
Yeah.
The Genius thing they don't say. They say fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
In 1995, you won a MacArthur Fellowship, a very prestigious award. How did that award change your life, or did it?
Well, it did something that most freelancers, I think, would really enjoy. If you're working freelance, no matter how well you're doing, you don't always know when the money's going to come. And even if you know how much is going to be coming, which you don't necessarily because it's royalties, you don't know when, even though you know when it's supposed to. With the MacArthur quarterly check, you know when and you know how much, and that's an enormous help. It helped me buy a house, which is really very good, and it was financial security for those 5 years, and for the future to some degree, I suppose. So it was a very useful thing. It did something else that money alone can't really do. I think it caused me to be taken more seriously by people who wouldn't normally take science fiction all that seriously. And I think that matters.
Now, you're the only science fiction author to have won the MacArthur Fellowship, is that correct?
I don't know, but if I am, very proud of it.
Esta señora empezó a escribir desde que era una adolescente. En esa época de su vida, frecuentemente pasaba el tiempo leyendo en la Biblioteca Central de Pasadena y escribiendo extensamente en un gran cuaderno rosa. Luego se interesó en revistas de ciencia ficción como Amazing Stories, Galaxy Science Fiction, The Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction y todas estas revistas que no he leído. Comenzó a leer historias de John Brunner, Senna Henderson, Theodore Sturgeon y otros autores parecidos que No conozco.
Let me step back and ask you to tell us a little bit about how you got started as a writer.
I began writing when I was 10. I began trying to sell when I was 13. I had been writing horse stories at 10. I began writing romances at 11. Didn't know a thing about horses or romances, I'm glad to say. When I was 12, I discovered science fiction, liked it, and began trying to sell it. I found a copy of a magazine called The Writer, and found it on a bus seat where someone had left it. And because of that, I found out how you submit things for publication. And I was often collecting rejection slips.
When was your first sale? How old were you?
Oh, not until I was 23. I was at Clarion, and I sold 2 short stories while there to editors who were there.
And that would be the Clarion Science Fiction Writing Workshop.
That's right.
Tell me about that. How did you hear about it? What made you decide to go to Clarion?
I didn't know anything about Clarion. I didn't know anything about conventions or fandom. I just liked to read the stuff and to write it. When I was, I was in a class. The Writers Guild of America West was giving a screenwriting class. I didn't care about screenwriting either, but Harlan Ellison was teaching one of the classes. I got into his class, and I got into the class of another teacher named Sid Stiebel, and learned what I could from them because I hadn't really had much success with what I'd picked up in college, where people did think science fiction was that weird stuff that you should grow out of. And Harlan suggested that I might want to go to Clarion. And he was a teacher that year, so that even though they had closed admissions pretty much, I got in because of him, and went and was terrified the whole time I was there, but wrote furiously. And as I mentioned, sold 2 stories. I thought I was off. I thought I was a writer. Didn't sell another word for 5 years.
Do you think...
Which happens a lot, by the way, to Clarion people.
Well, I was going to ask, do you think Clarion is useful for an aspiring writer?
Oh, yes. Yes. Because all your teachers are people who are writing for a living. And that matters a great deal. Your teacher is not an English teacher who doesn't necessarily know what the market is doing and how to help you break in. Your teacher is someone who is out there in it and who can tell you the truth and who will give you good criticism.
And now that you're in that role yourself, do you go back and teach at Clarion?
Yes, I do a Clarion every couple of years. I do a lot of speaking at universities and colleges. I kind of like it, actually, because I know how difficult it was for me when I was getting started. There was no one at first. Before I found the Screenwriters Guild and Harlan and all that, there was just literally nobody. So I know people have these questions to ask, and if I can answer them, I'm glad to do it. I had a student come up to me at Michigan State University, and this was a young black woman many years ago, and say, you know, I always loved science fiction. I've always wanted to write it, but I didn't think we did that.
So how did you go into it?
With my eyes tightly shut. I assumed that I could do it. I wasn't being brave or even thoughtful. I wanted it, and I assumed I could have it.
¿Y a que no se imaginan qué fue lo que inspiró a Butler con tan solo 12 años a comenzar a escribir? Una película de 1954 llamada...
Do not try to follow me. You cannot get help. Around this house, I've drawn invisible walls through which no one may pass.
Here is a news reporter with a world-shattering story. A girl trying to escape from her past. The scientist trapped in spite of his knowledge. And here also is the barmaid, hiding a murderous secret. a murderer with a life already forfeit. And introducing the devil girl from Mars herself.
Get back or I'll fire.
You fool.
Get back! Shoot, man, shoot!
Y, como se imaginarán, Octavia Butler sabía que ella podía hacer algo mucho mejor que eso.
I was influenced to write science fiction 2 years after I began writing other things by a bad movie.
We saw this with our own eyes, an object the like of which we had never seen before.
And
A frightening, strange shape descending from outer space with relentless purpose.
I take it back.
Where did it come from? And what did it want of us?
Hello! It's an aircraft, all right, but like nothing I've ever seen before. Hello! What do you mean? Hello! It's like something from another planet.
I have heard that this has happened to other people, but my response to the movie was, geez, I can write a better story than that. And I thought about it and I realized, geez, anybody could write a better story than that. And my final assumption, however erroneous, was somebody got paid for writing that story. Devil Girl from Mars.
Además de la película, hay otra razón por la que Butler decidió escribir específicamente textos de ciencia ficción, y tiene que ver con el contexto que estaba viviendo.
Really, though, one of the things we were doing with the space race, and I was an avid spectator, but one of the things we were doing was having a nuclear war without having one. We managed to get the perks of war technologically, and we managed to compete, and we managed not to wipe each other out. I wonder really if the guy shooting the gun at New Year's is a greater problem than the ignorant politician who can do a lot more harm. Because there have been times when we have done better. Yeah. You know, I mentioned the space race, but I don't know that we will. I know that I want us to do better. I want us to focus on other things than, well, for instance, I've been complaining about the number of would-be leaders who seem to be willing to sacrifice half their country if they can just rule over the rest. I mean, we seem to have had, since the end of the Cold War, too many people like that.
Like, give me an example.
Oh, this man who was just recently killed in Sierra Leone.
Yes.
The man who is in charge of what's left of Yugoslavia.
Milosevic.
Mm-hmm. This kind of thing where if you don't know what else to do, you can at least start a war and grab something, or lose something, whichever. Even people like Saddam Hussein. I mean, Saddam Hussein, the man who was in charge of the what's now the Congo again. These are people who live in incredibly rich countries, but who can't really find any way in themselves to share the wealth with their people. I know that we can be better human beings than that, but it's so tempting, you know, to be greedy and have power and keep it from other people.
Así que Butler se inscribió en todos los cursos de escritura creativa que pudo encontrar.
You'll be a little self-improvement thing there, aren't you?
No, I'm enjoying myself.
Okay, enjoying.
I mean, I don't mind if I improve.
Courses think of improvement. I mean, I think of courses, but you're saying that.
I see.
I know books is enjoyment. You could say enjoyment, but teaching these courses you take are it's just about self-education.
Well, it's about you could definitely. It's about sending my mind off someplace that it hasn't been before.
A principios de la década de los 70, en un taller para escritores minoritarios, conoció al autor de ciencia ficción Harlan Ellison, quien le introdujo al taller de ciencia ficción de Clarion, donde Butler aprendió a perfeccionar su oficio, entre otros muchos escritores de ideas afines a la suya. Así pudo vender su primera historia, En ese entonces, Butler tomó trabajos ocasionales para mantenerse, escribiendo en las primeras horas de la mañana antes del trabajo. Les estoy hablando de 2, 3 de la mañana.
When I was working for other people, I would get up at 2.
Yeah.
And I would write until I had to go to work. And I would go to work grouchy because I was already tired.
Yeah.
And now I certainly don't have to do that. But there was an in-between time when I got up around 3 or 4, just because I liked the early morning hours before the light changed. And now I get up probably between 5:30 and 6. And I get to write most of the day, unless I have to go out and do something.
En 1975 vendió su primera novela, Pattern Master, a la editorial Doubleday, seguida rápidamente por Mind of Mind y Survivor. Estos 3 libros forman parte de lo que ahora conocemos como la serie Patternist. Fue hasta finales de la década de los 70 que Butler pudo ganarse la vida solo escribiendo. Su subida a la fama comenzó definitivamente en 1984 con Speech Sounds, o Sonidos del Habla en español. Ganó el premio Hugo para cuento y un año más tarde, Bloodchild, o Hija de Sangre, ganó el premio Hugo, el premio Locus y el premio Lector de Ciencia Ficción por Mejor Relato Corto. Pero, de todas sus publicaciones, Kindred, publicado como Parentesco en español, es probablemente su trabajo más conocido. De hecho, se acaba de adaptar a la televisión. Ese libro es un poco menos ciencia ficción y más fantasía. Se trata de una mujer afroamericana y escritora además, que viaja en el tiempo y revive los horrores de la esclavitud en las plantaciones de Maryland, antes de la Guerra Civil estadounidense. Butler confesó para The Huntington: quería llegar a la gente desde la emoción, como la historia no suele hacerlo. En general, los textos de Octavia Butler están caracterizados por protagonistas mujeres, fuertes y, frecuentemente, un agudo comentario social en historias que pueden abarcar desde el pasado remoto hasta el futuro lejano. Es más, a Octavia Butler se le considera una de las pioneras de lo que hoy conocemos como afrofuturismo, un término acuñado por Mark Derry para describir, y cito, la ficción especulativa que trata temas afroamericanos y aborda preocupaciones afroamericanas en el contexto de la tecnocultura del siglo XX. Además, sus textos tienen claros tintes feministas, y vamos a ver por qué. Lo cierto es que, si bien ahora se le está reconociendo mucho, Butler luchó durante décadas porque sus obras pudieran tener un espacio en el mercado editorial. Esto se debe a que sus novelas distópicas muchas veces exploran temas como la injusticia contra la gente afrodescendiente, el calentamiento global, los derechos de las mujeres, la disparidad política. Y esto tiene mucho sentido. Después de todo, su crianza en Pasadena le permitió a Butler experimentar la diversidad cultural y étnica en medio de una altísima segregación racial. Sus historias, entonces, a menudo replican estas estructuras de dominación como un tipo de parasitismo. Pensemos en Hija de Sangre, por ejemplo, donde los seres humanos tienen que llevar los huevecillos de otra especie dentro de su propio cuerpo para sobrevivir en un planeta extraño. Los otros de los textos de Butler, ya sean alienígenas, vampiros, superhumanos, normalmente son desafiados por una protagonista que encarna la diferencia, la diversidad y el cambio. Como señala el crítico literario John R. Pfeiffer, en cierto sentido, sus historias ponen a prueba distintas soluciones posibles a la condición autodestructiva en la que se encuentra la humanidad. Las protagonistas de Butler suelen ser personas privadas de derechos que soportan, sacrifican y abrazan cambios radicales para sobrevivir. Como señalan, y perdonen mi pronunciación aquí, DeWitt Douglas Kilgore y Ranu Samantrai, que son 2 investigadores literarios especializados en Butler. Sus historias se centran en personajes minoritarios cuyos antecedentes históricos les dan un conocimiento personal, íntimo de violaciones y explotaciones brutales. La misma Butler admitió en una entrevista con el New York Times en el 2000, cuando empecé a escribir ciencia ficción, cuando empecé a leer, no me interesaba nada de lo que leía. Las únicas personas negras que podías encontrar eran personajes ocasionales o personajes tan tontos que igual no podían manejar nada. Me escribí e inscribí a mí misma en esas historias Porque esta soy yo y estoy aquí y estoy escribiendo. Y esto puede ser complementado con otra entrevista. Corre video.
I'm interested in the idea of telling stories as creating self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you think that's part of what your role is?
Or perhaps for not so much self-fulfilling prophecy as I can't think of the word. The sorts of things that therapists do when they're trying to rid you of a phobia, and they do it by dumping whatever you're afraid of onto you or you onto it.
Aversion therapy?
Desensitization.
Do you deliberately in your work strive for that, to desensitize people on some of these issues?
No, it's not a matter of deliberately doing it. It's just a matter of behaving as though the world were a little bit more as you wish it were in some way. So my characters, who are often black and female, behave as though they have no limitations. And they don't run around saying, look at me, I'm black, I'm female, I have no limitations. They just behave this way and do what they need to do.
A eso se refiere Natalie Russell, una curadora asistente en The Huntington, donde han sido exhibidos todos los manuscritos y notas de Butler, cuando dice que esta autora, cansada de las historias con hombres blancos como protagonistas, desarrolla una narrativa alternativa desde un punto de vista muy personal. Y es que incluso cuando están dotados de habilidades adicionales, estos personajes se ven obligados a experimentar exclusión y una angustia física, mental y emocional sin precedentes para impedir que la humanidad se autodestruya. Esto puede involucrar manipulación genética, mestizaje, simbiosis, mutación, contacto alienígena, contaminación, otras formas de hibridación como medio para corregir las causas sociobiológicas de la violencia jerárquica. Y cualquier parecido con nuestra sociedad real, donde el poder o la pérdida de este y ciertas condiciones biológicas van de la mano, no es mera coincidencia. DeWitt Douglas Kilgore y Rano Samantrai insisten en que esta destrucción del cuerpo humano es literal y metafórica, porque demuestra la profundidad de los cambios necesarios para darle una nueva forma a un mundo que ya está organizado desde la desigualdad.
It's not about meeting strange-looking people or anything like that. It's about it's what I'm going for is the most human situation I can of people who are trying to establish themselves on another world that is definitely not just another Earth, and that they can't escape from and have to deal with.
You treat subjects like race, sexual prejudice.
Sure.
All of that.
Mm-hmm.
You could put that in
I
a
write about
context that
people.
has...
I write about people and the different ways of being human. And you can't really do that unless you write about a lot of different kinds of people.
Nuestra supervivencia para Butler es sinónima de la tolerancia a la diferencia. En última instancia, su enfoque en los personajes marginados sirve para ilustrar cómo la determinación de un individuo explotado puede traer un cambio crucial. Su visión se resume en la parábola de la sembradora, donde escribe: acojan la diversidad, únanse o sean divididos, robados, gobernados, asesinados por quienes los consideran presas, acojan la diversidad o sean destruidos.
Octavia Butler, could you read a little from Parable of the Talents?
I'm going to read a verse or two, and keep in mind these were written early in the 90s, but I think they apply forever, actually. This first one, I have a character in the books who is, someone who is taking the country fascist and who manages to get elected president, and who oddly enough comes from Texas. And here is one of the things that my character is inspired to write about this sort of situation. She says, choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by the opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. To be led by a liar is to ask to be lied to. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery. And there's one other that I thought I should read because I see it happening so much. I got the idea for it when I heard someone answer a political question with a political slogan. And he didn't seem to realize that he was quoting somebody. He seemed to have thought that he had a creative thought there. And I wrote this verse. Beware, all too often we say what we hear others say. We think what we are told that we think. We see what we are permitted to see. Worse, we see what we are told that we see. Repetition and pride are the keys to this. To see and to hear even an obvious lie again and again and again may be to say it almost by reflex, then to defend it because we have said it, and at last to embrace it because we've defended it, and because we cannot admit that we've embraced and defended an obvious lie. Thus, without thought, without intent, we make mere echoes of ourselves, and we say what we hear others say. Just one more comment on the human condition, I guess.
Morí. Esa cita me mató. Ahora sí, Ham, descansa en paz. Pero tiene razón. Y otro dato interesante es que, además de la injusticia y la segregación racial, la literatura de Butler explora las tensiones entre hombres y mujeres. La autora siempre trabajó para desarrollar personajes femeninos fuertes y esto se convirtió en el sello de su escritura. También desafió la identidad de género tradicional. Hija de sangre, por ejemplo, es la historia de un hombre que decide embarazarse de alguna forma. Más que nada, hablamos de un planeta donde quienes deben sacrificar sus cuerpos para la reproducción de una especie alienígena son, contra toda expectativa, los hombres. Y abundan los estudios académicos como el de Ellis Ray Helford, donde se afirma que la estructura de poder en Hija de Sangre sirve como metáfora de las relaciones de género humanas bajo el patriarcado, las cuales se ven desafiadas a través de la representación de hombres que sufren los dolores de la maternidad. Otro caso interesante es el de Wild Seed, que podríamos traducir como semilla salvaje, donde la historia gira en torno a dos personajes afrodescendientes, Doro y Anyeonwoo, que cambian de forma y de sexo. Y con esto su identidad de género también cambia.
I just did my Umpty Umph race panel. One of the things I said, I had thought that I wasn't going to do the panel. One of the things I said to them was, you know, I've been doing the race panel since the 70s, and I almost didn't show up for this one. But I've decided that one of the things we could do is make it kind of the race and sex panel. It was actually race, caste, and culture. Mm-hmm. So I added sex to that and spiced up the room. It made everything nice and lively.
Ay, les juro que autoras como Octavia Butler me regresan las ganas de vivir que gente como J.K. Rowling a veces me quita.
Are you surprised that you became a writer?
Oh, no. No, I think I had one choice. Well, two choices. I could become a writer or I could die really young. Because there wasn't anything else that I wanted.
So I mean, if you could not have been a writer, you would have said to the gods, take me now, because I have no reason to exist.
Done something stupid, and that's what would have happened.
What was it about writing for you?
Oh, you got to make your own worlds. You got to write yourself in. Whether you were a part of the greater society or not, you got to write yourself in. So I got to write myself in.
Y bueno, con lo que sabemos ya sobre Octavia Butler, sería fácil asumir que le era muy fácil escribir. Sin embargo, en su prefacio a Hija de Sangre y otros relatos, Butler escribe: la verdad es que odio escribir relatos. Intentar escribirlos me ha enseñado mucho más sobre la frustración y la desesperación de lo que jamás querría saber.
Has it been difficult for you?
It was horrible at first. Horrible at first. Horrible at first.
Si a esta señora le costaba trabajo escribir a veces, ¿qué nos espera a nosotras las mortales? En fin. Por más extraña que nos parezca esta confesión, tiene sentido que Butler se desesperara a veces, porque su ciencia ficción no solo se basaba en su imaginación. Luego de tener una idea, podía pasar meses investigando meticulosamente la parte científica de la ficción que iba a construir. Llegó a viajar al Amazonas para ver de primera mano la diversidad con la que podía trabajar. Se volvió experta en biología, genética, medicina. El cambio climático le preocupaba mucho, al igual que la política, la industria farmacéutica y una variedad de temas sociales. Y todo eso está presente en su escritura.
Your work often deals with urban societies. How do you see the future of America's cities?
Oh my.
In 30 words or less.
Right. I have no idea how to answer that. I suppose I could tell you to take a look at Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. Now, that isn't prophecy, I hope. The society that I portray in these two books is pretty much broken. People are living, the people who are surviving with any decency at all are living in walled communities and risking their lives whenever they go out. There are a lot of reasons for this. Drugs, of course, and deterioration of public education, the environmental situation. Global warming is practically a character in Parable of the Sower. Lots of other things that have simply, they're problems now. They become disasters because they're not attended to. And I hope, of course, that we will be smarter than that.
Are you a pessimist or an optimist?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I don't think. Okay, what I've noticed about the human species over my lifetime, Butler's words of wisdom, is that we do tend to go to the edge more often than we ought to. You know, we go to the edge and then we look and we realize, my God, that's a precipice. We could fall over, we could die, and we draw back. The problem is with something like global warming, you can't just draw back and make it okay. With nuclear war, you can. I mean, the Soviet Union decided not to exist any longer. So we're probably not going to have a nuclear war, at least not for a generation or two, until someone else decides that it might be a really fun thing to do. But with global warming, after you've spent over a century messing things up, by the time you decide to fix it, your grandchildren might see some results, but chances are you won't. It's dangerous to assume that whatever we've been doing, we're going to keep doing that. You know, the future is more of the same, only more advanced. During the frenzy about the new millennium, I reread an old book, I think was a collection by Harry Harrison called The Year 2000. Oh, and right. It was done back in 1970. And that means that stories were written in the 60s, thereabouts. And over again, you saw that what the writers were writing about was their own time, but just more of it, or harder, or higher, or whatever, you know, more of the same. I think the one thing we can be sure of is that we won't have, you know, straight line prophecy coming true, that whatever technological things we're doing now, we'll just do more of that and better. I think we'll get surprises. September 11th is certainly an example of that. So was the fall of the Soviet Union. I think it's dangerous to assume that that we can actually see the future by only looking at the technological advancements we've made so far. I want to get something in for a moment. I want to kind of go back to the idea of where will we find the wisdom to do the right things with the new tools that science offers us. Oddly enough, I found them in the places that Harlan doesn't like. It's not wisdom that we're going to need, really. We'll need it, but we probably won't show that much of it. Let me put it that way. I think what we're going to need is breaks in an odd sort of way, especially when it comes to changing human beings in ways that might not necessarily be good for us. And I think the breaks that we are going to have are religion and politics, and a certain kind of economic self-interest. I think we need them. I think we're going to hate them a lot of the time because they seem to be in the way, as they do, as religion does right now, seem to be in the way of certain medical research. But I think it's important that they're there, because without them, we're liable to go charging off and do terrible things to ourselves.
Quizá por eso resuenan tanto sus historias hoy en día. Estos son los problemas a los que nos enfrentamos ahora como humanidad. Cuando yo supe todo el proceso detrás de la primera página de cada libro que escribía, me imaginé que ese sería su principal reto para escribir: idear un mundo en el que pudiera integrar un montón de información verídica y mezclarla con otros datos imaginarios. Pero no. Aparentemente el principal problema de escribir ciencia ficción es que es ciencia ficción.
Do you think of yourself as a science fiction writer?
No. On my business card it says writer.
What's the problem with being a science fiction author?
Well, in spite of the freedom that it gives you to examine almost any theme that you can think of, it's confining in the sense that a lot of people think science fiction is Star Wars. And you have to be about 14 to enjoy it. And if you're any older than 14, well, you should be reading literature, whatever that is. I think, as I said on the panel, the problem that we have more than race, color, class, or whatever is those two words, science fiction. Because people tend to presume that they know what it is and they don't like it. And as I said, you have to be 14 to enjoy it. And you tend to get reviewed by people who aren't paid very much and who review your flap copy.
So you think that in order to succeed, an author should try and break out of that genre label?
I don't know about an author. I mean, there are people who are doing very well. I have had to see what I could do about breaking out just because I felt that I had plateaued. I had a fairly decent science fiction audience, nothing to write home about, but fairly decent, and it wasn't growing. And my books weren't selling more and more and more in any serious way. But I knew that I had other audiences or other potential audiences. I knew that I had a feminist audience. I knew that I had a black audience. And in some cases, for instance, a New Age audience, and I suppose a general audience. So some of these groups, the black, feminist, and New Age, they have bookstores. What's left of independent bookstores. But I was really interested in reaching these people. And when I was selling to science fiction only publishers, or publishers who had their little science fiction department where they kind of wanted to keep you, I didn't feel that I was reaching them because the marketing people didn't really care about advertising to anybody but the science fiction audience. I went with a small publisher in the hope of reaching more people, which is an odd thing to do, but I did. And it actually did work.
So to reach beyond that classic 14-year-old boy audience...
But that's not really the audience. That's just presumed to be the audience by people who don't like science fiction or think they don't.
Well, my question is, did you find yourself doing anything to reach beyond that audience, apart from going to a new publisher, or is it all on the marketing and business side?
It was a question of how I was perceived. not what I was doing. I don't think it was ever a question of what I was doing.
Why science fiction?
Because there are no closed doors, no walls. I mean, the only rule is if you use science, you should use it accurately. You can look at, examine, play with, anything. Absolutely anything.
Pero esta señora, nueva reina de nuestros corazones, no se rindió. Al contrario, en uno de sus cuadernos, Butler escribió: seré una escritora superventas. Después de Imago, cada uno de mis libros estará en las listas de Los Angeles Times, el New York Times, Publishers Weekly, el Washington Post, etc. Mis novelas estarán en estas listas, así los editores las promuevan o no. Así me paguen un buen adelanto o no. Así gane otro premio o no. Esta es mi vida, escribo novelas superventas. Cada una sube hasta la cima de las listas y permanece ahí por meses, al menos 2. Que así sea, que así sea. Encontraré la manera de hacerlo, que así sea, que así sea. Mis libros serán leídos por millones de personas, que así sea, que así sea. Con esto, Octavia Butler se mantenía enfocada en sus metas y se motivaba a sí misma a seguir escribiendo.
Finally, being able to do that, I reached more people. I remember my editor was a little afraid even then to approach feminist bookstores, but he had no problem approaching black bookstores. And then he discovered the feminist bookstores were approaching him saying, "What, you mean she was in town and you didn't send her to us?" So I was reaching the people that I had been hoping to reach.
So the books that were marketed as SF are just as interesting to those new audiences?
They seem to be, which surprised me a little bit, but then again, they do have strong female characters, so why not?
What's the best part of where you are now?
Well, I don't have to worry about how to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
I get to write the stories that I want to write and not worry that maybe they won't be accepted because they already have been. I can recall my best friend telling me back when I was working on my first novel that I really should change some things because they were perhaps going to have the wrong attention drawn to them. And thank goodness I paid no attention. I do that.
Is it a joy for you?
Oh, yeah.
Just writing is a joy.
Well, I get to read and write. You don't just sit there all day and punch away. But the reading stimulates my thinking in so many directions that, yes, it's definitely a joy. So I have never really wanted to do anything else.
Y como esta, nos quedan muchas notas de Butler que contenían consejos de escritura invaluables y mensajes de automotivación. Esta es otra. Digan historias llenas de hechos. Hagan que la gente toque y saboree y sepa. Hagan que la gente sienta. Este es un muy buen consejo a quienes aspiramos a escribir un día.
So what advice do you have for young people today?
Who want to write? Oh, definitely that they should. It's difficult and sometimes impossible. I mean, I am coming off a very long writer's block, so I can acknowledge the difficulty.
How long?
7 years. It didn't mean that I wasn't writing. Writer's block is not when I'm not writing. It's when I'm not writing anything worthwhile.
And for people who suffer from writer's block, your advice?
Keep writing. Keep writing. It's the old idea that behavior that gets repeated gets rewarded tends to get repeated. If you stop writing, then you're kind of rewarding yourself with not writing. If you keep writing, after a while your brain maybe gets the idea. I'm not sure I said that very clearly, but I hope you know what I mean. Just that if you are a writer, you can't stop writing. I used to have a teacher who said, if anything can prevent you being a writer, don't be one.
También nos quedan otros fragmentos donde se enfatiza, por ejemplo, la importancia de los detalles para crear suspenso, para regular el ritmo de la narración, crear cierto tono o atmósfera, o para construir un mundo más creíble. Ante todo, Butler buscaba crear intensidad, generar emoción, mover y conmover muchas veces a sus lectores. No sé qué opinan ustedes, pero yo creo que lo logra. Una y otra vez. Así que la próxima vez que les apasione una película afrofuturista, de esas a las que Pantera Negra parece haberles abierto un camino en Hollywood, disfrútenla mucho, sí, pero recuerden que probablemente hay por ahí algún libro de Octavia Butler que ella hizo lo mismo, pero mucho, mucho mejor.
I'm always glad that there are more readers that people find out about me. People keep telling me, oh, I would have read you before, but I've never heard of you.